There's a really popular commercial on TV right now, which starts out by saying, "What's in your wallet?" And it gets us to kind of take a look at not just our credit cards, but kind of where's your security. And I thought about that this week as I read the gospel, because in a sense, Jesus is asking us not about what's in our wallet, but he's asking, what's in your heart? What's in your heart? And I've been thinking a lot this week about hearts. Maybe you have too, with all the awful stuff that we've been listening to. And I've been wondering if our hearts are getting hardened. You think about El Paso and Dayton, and really the number of shootings they have in Chicago every weekend is mind-numbing. And when you think about that, I looked up a few statistics. So like last year, there were, I think, 23 mass shootings and about 131 killed. This year, so far, there are 25 with 140. But what was even worse was I read a MSNBC article where the author said this: you usually have typically about 29 mass shootings a year. We're starting to talk about it as being typical. I don't know about you, but I about fell off my chair. The other thing that has been really distressing for me is that we've heard it said a lot now that they're attributing this to mental illness. What a terrible, horrible thing to say about the millions of Americans who struggle with depression and all kinds of mental illness. And if you look at what the facts are, the American Psychiatric Association says there's absolutely no correlation between that. Absolutely no correlation. In fact, most of the time, those who have mental illness are the victims of that. What a terrible thing. In fact, it's my experience in 35 years of priesthood that many times people have mental illness, they realize that they need their faith. They realize that they don't have a belief in God, they have no hope. And I've known several people who have told me that the only reason that they didn't commit suicide is because of their faith in God. And a woman stopped me last night after one of the masses and she said, "Thanks for reminding me," because she said, "That was me." However, this is an illness, but it's not a mental illness. It's a spiritual illness. And this spiritual illness goes across all races, all categories, all politics, because what it is it's when people who order their lives without God are going to wind up doing horrible things. Because all they see is what's right in front of them. They order their lives without God, they will wind up doing horrible things. There's a lot of examples in Scripture that a lot of times I think we miss or we misinterpret. So let's take, for example, the story about the rich young man. Do you remember that? And so he went away sad because he had many possessions. We get that mixed up most of the time because we think that means that God's getting after people who are wealthy or can support themselves. It has nothing to do with that at all. The rich young man went away empty because whatever he had was pushing him away from God. It was getting in the way. It has nothing to do with if you have it or not. It's what your relationship with it is, you see? I think that times like this cause us to remind ourselves about why Jesus came to the earth. You see, people don't sin out of malice. They sin out of weakness. Let me repeat that. People don't sin out of malice. Nobody gets up in the morning and says, I think I'll commit a mortal sin today. We just don't do that. We do it out of weakness. That's why we need our faith. That's why we need something to support us and encourage us and to take our opinions and our thoughts sometimes and reel them back in. Okay? That's why Jesus came. He came to save me. He came to save you. He came to save us. That's the only reason he came, was to save us from ourselves. One of the things that I read this week was somebody was looking on the blog a couple years ago of the El Paso shooter. And he was quoted on that blog by saying, I just don't know what I'm going to do with my life. Well, we know what he did, don't we? He got his 15 minutes of fame on the news. We are raising a generation of people who are hopeless, not because of them, but because they have nothing to hope in. And I think as we take a look at that and we look at the life of Jesus, that one of the things that we're reminded of is that really, look at the Bible, Jesus really shied away from politics. He was after the root cause of things. Remember when he came to the earth, he said, I'm not going to come to abolish the law. He wasn't going to get into that. But he said, I'm going to give you a new law, and that new law is the law of what? What? The law of love. So we have to figure out, what does that mean in a situation like this? Is that difficult? Yes, it's difficult. So I've been thinking, you want to know what's in my heart? This is what I've been thinking about and praying about this week. Politics, legislation, gun control, immigration reform, helping people out, improving mental illness opportunities. Those are all things we need to be discussing. Yes, those are all some things that we need. God's given us the gifts and talents. But that is not the root cause. That's not going to... You pick the issue. Shootings, abortion, whatever it is. You are never going to legislate those things and make them go away completely. It won't happen. Look at history. It will never happen. The root cause is having a godless life. Is where God is no longer anything. And the reason that becomes really significant is because if you don't have that, then what you see right in front of you is all there is. The second reading today was great, talking about Abraham. So if you ever feel like you don't have any hope, think about Abraham. The Bible said this morning he was as good as dead. There's a compliment. He was an old man and Sarah was sterile. So if you looked at the brute facts, they were done for. And what happened? God moved in their life. They didn't give up their faith. God moved in their life, took them to a whole other country, and made their descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sands on the shore of the sea. So this can happen. But I think that we need to be wrestling with now in this one nation under God, that without God it becomes all about me. It becomes my rights, my stuff, my opinion, my money. Without God. Without God there is no moral compass. It's kind of whatever my opinion is. Whatever I think should happen is the rule that I'm going to follow. Without God, there's no compassion and no empathy, and it always becomes about those people and them. Do you know what? Jesus never says those or them. He doesn't say that. Without God, everything is about self-gratification. It's about what's good for me. It's about me stockpiling what I have, and I really don't care about the effect that it has on anybody else. Well, last I checked, but whoever dies with the most toys still dies. And whoever dies without God has an eternity that I can't begin to imagine what it would be like. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying. So what do we do? What do we do? I think it goes back to our treasure. Where your treasure is, there your heart is also. And so we need to look into our own lives as individuals and then corporately about what we think is most important. I've said to you several times recently, because I'm firmly convicted of this, that if we as Roman Catholics in the United States, of which there are more than us than anybody else, if we got our act together, we would be agents of moral change in this country. But we are too damn afraid. We don't want to make anybody feel bad. Well, they can believe what they want to believe. We are past that point, friends. And I think that one of the ways that we bring that home is this. If our faith, if our religious practice, if our coming to church on a weekend is something that we can easily excuse ourselves from and teach our kids, well, they had a game last night and they got home late, or we've got this athletic thing, or we've got the fair, we've got 4-H, or you name the issue, we're on vacation. We are sending a very clear message to our children that this is not important. It says that. If we can easily write it off, particularly in a country where we got too many churches in the first place. If we can just write it off and say, well, God will understand, He will not. And that sends a very clear message. It's like our religion is like a piece of jewelry. It's an accessory. We can put it on or take it off. Those things that we substitute for church, they're not bad. That's the seductive part. But we have more generations that are growing up who don't really say, well, you can't make kids. Tell me about it. Many of us grew up in an age, I don't care what was going on last night. You get your butt up and you go to church on Sunday. Because mom and dad said this is a priority. We have got to regain that. We have got to place God back in the center. Otherwise, all the rest of this legislation and discussion and finger pointing and bipartisan and partisan against each other, all that stuff is just going to continue. We don't have to wait for anybody else to do that. We can do it in our own lives, in our own families. I've shared with you before that we were at a clergy convocation several years ago, and the speaker said, well, if you want to really find out what's most important in your life, look at where you spend your money and where you spend your time. Look at your bank statement or your checkbook, and look at your calendar. Maybe that's a good thing for all of us to do, because God needs to be at the top of both those lists. And nobody makes that decision for you but you. And so until we as a people, as individuals first, but as a people, realize that we need to bend the knee, not to some other cause someplace, but to our higher power. I mean, talk to somebody who's running a 12-step program, AA, or a lot of those 12-step programs. The very first step, do you know what that is? Admitting that I am powerless and I need a power greater than myself to restore my sanity. People who are working the program understand that without God, they are sunk. My dad, died after 36 years of sobriety because he put God back into being number one. It wasn't that way when we were growing up. We have to remember who we need to bow before. If we don't, that we will remain victims of all this vitriolic, decisive, negative, name-calling stuff that's going on in our country, because it's impacting into us. I mean, 2 weeks ago when I talked about, remember I said something about do your homework? Don't just take what the networks say, do your homework. Oh, somebody chewed me out here. He wasn't from here, not that that makes any difference. I don't have to do my homework. Those people don't belong here. And I said, I don't really think that the scriptures say that. I don't care, he said. Okay. This is what we're breeding. This is what's happening. But we are so much better than that. We are so much better than that. God's given us the grace and the intellect. All we need now is the humility to do this. So in today's gospel, Jesus says, for where your treasure is, there also your heart will be. So let's start thinking about what's in my heart.